Okay, well, I think we will get started now, and I want to welcome everybody who has joined this virtual speaker series event tonight. I'm David Barnard, delighted that we have an opportunity to visit with each other. I want to thank Shelley Carlisle from the University Club for being our backseat driver, so to speak, here, who will be making sure that we're as technically proficient as we possibly can be. I want to say briefly, first of all, that the speaker series, as many of you probably know, is organized by a committee, and the committee of University Club members responsible for this program and the ones that preceded it some months ago included Sally Leisure, Kay Abramowitz, and Tom Smith, along with me. Sally has left the club, and we are fortunate that Kay Turan has replaced her on the committee, and we're looking forward to further events in coming months that this committee pulls together. Those of you who had participated in these earlier programs will perhaps remember that in the fall of 2019, we had a program that was on the question of homelessness in Portland. And in January of 2020, we explored the impact of diversity and inclusion policies on businesses in the Portland area. This program was originally slated to take place this past April. And what I want to say about all of this is that in order to have these programs put together, the planning actually took place quite some time ago, probably in the winter of 2019, which I must say seems like a lifetime ago. We are living in a very different world from the winter of 2019 in all sorts of ways. But this particular program, I think, is particularly timely. We talk about rural Oregon in a social club that is based here in downtown Portland. If we learned anything from the recent election, and we learned the same thing really 4 years earlier, there is a stunning difference in the voting patterns, among other things, between America's cities and the rural areas of the country. And to the extent that those voting differences reflect different ways of understanding the world, of growing up, of setting priorities and values, it means that we have a lot of listening to do across the rural-urban divide in the United States. And we could think of this program as perhaps a little bit of that effort to do some of that sort of listening. And we're very lucky that the people who will be doing most of the talking this evening are Casey Kulla, a farmer and county commissioner in Yamhill County, and Bill Sweat, proprietor and wine grower of the Winderlea Vineyard and Winery here in the Willamette Valley. And I wanted to bring them together, and I have a list of questions which I hope will promote some understanding and some good learning on the part of those of us who are listening to these good people. I want to mention one way that we hope you can participate as well towards the end of our hour. And that is if you are familiar enough with your system here to click on the participants icon down at the bottom of your screen, it should pop up a list of panelists and then attendees. And at the bottom right corner of that white box, you see something that says raise hand. If you will click on that, at the time of questioning, then we will see that and we'll be able to put you on the screen with your comments and questions. So if you do have a question, make sure you have your clothes on by then, because you will be coming onto the screen along with the rest of us. Or else just aim the camera at you from the neck up. Okay, well, let's begin. And I'd like to ask first both Bill and Casey to tell us briefly the roles that the two of you play in rural Oregon and in what ways you interact with the people there. Maybe we'll start with Bill.
Thank you. My thanks to you, David, and to the committee and to my dear friend Kay Abramowitz for inviting me to participate in this panel. So I feel like I exist in a very unique part of the rural scene in Oregon. I'm a fine wine grape grower. We farm about 60 acres in total of wine grapes, and also a winemaker. My wife and I own a winery, so we not only grow the grapes, but we then make wine and sell the product there. So it's a very different model than I think most people who work in agriculture have. And I live in Yamhill County, just outside of the city of Dundee. Dundee is about 25 miles as the crow flies, but about 45 minutes from Portland. Dundee is a city of about 3,500 people. But it's a very interesting city, and part of that is, I think, because of the wine industry, which is in the area. And I sometimes jokingly say that I live in one of the few cities of 3,500 people in the United States where there are a dozen outstanding restaurants within 15 minutes of my front door. That's not true in most rural communities. And so that creates kind of a very unique context for me. I have been on the Oregon Wine Board, and I've been the president of the Oregon Winegrowers Association, chair of the Oregon Wine Board. I currently sit on there's an agricultural advisory committee for Thousand Friends of Oregon. For a time, we were living inside the city limit. I was on the budget committee for the city of Dundee. So one of the things I've loved, I moved here from the East Coast, and one of the things I've really loved about Oregon is how accessible it is, how relatively easy it is to be engaged in the community. And if you want to participate, people will let you participate. I grew up in Massachusetts, and it's not quite the same there.
I agree.
So this is I think one of the really wonderful things about being out in this part of the country.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Casey?
Yeah, so it's so great to be here. And thank you, Bill, for giving me a good word. Can you hear me? My internet is cutting in and out. Fantastic. And we'll talk about that later. I think question 9 is the front and center is accessible broadband. So we'll get to that. Okay. But it's Kulla with an umlaut. We don't actually have an umlaut, but it rhymes with hula. So my wife and I have a certified organic row crop vegetable farm. We're direct market all of our produce through, we sell to families, and we've been doing that for the past 15 seasons. I'm also chair of the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners. And Bill and I know each other because Bill is active in everything, and he's also very inviting. So he says, hey, let's come and talk about this thing, and I'll bring some friends. So he and I did not talk over the questions beforehand, so I'm super excited to hear Bill's perspective on a lot of this. Okay. But yeah, that's the short version. There's lots of questions to get to, so we'll get through some more of the bio.
Well, let me start by asking both of you how you survived the wildfires.
Why don't you go first, Casey?
All right, we'll switch on and off. You know, as the chair of the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners, I got the call at midnight to come into the Emergency Command Center to sign the Declaration of Emergency. And I've never wanted to do that. Right now we have two emergencies running concurrently, and the wildfire emergency is one of those. So I spent a lot of time. You know, our household is totally safe from wildfires. We did have to harvest in the middle of really intense smoke on several occasions. But people in our community, while they were terrified of the threat of evacuation, the smoke, the fires on Chehalem Mountain and over Hag Lake, which is just north of Yamhill County's border, our communities really escaped the fires unscathed, especially compared to other communities. But we also served as the evacuation center for a lot of livestock at our Yamhill County Fairgrounds. So that's the short version of that one. And let me tell you, it was very intense. But as a climate scientist, I was like, you know, we should probably start talking about taking some action here.
Okay, we might get to that. Bill?
Yeah.
What about for you?
Yeah, and Casey, I'll try to remember. I was just reading a great article on wildfires in Wired magazine. I'll try to send that to you as well. And so they actually had a pretty meaningful effect on us. And so, and just as context, we've never had fires this close before. Typically, the fires have been in southern Oregon and up in the Columbia Gorge, and they've been noticeable. You would see the haze, and in 2017, I think maybe we had a day where you could actually smell the smoke. But this year, we had smoke hanging over the vineyard for 10 days. And that was significantly different. And it was hanging over the vineyard for 10 days right at the start of harvest. And so so that was a big concern of ours, probably exacerbated by the fact that none of us have any experience managing a harvest during fires, right, during smoke. And so we all have relationships with people elsewhere in Napa Valley or Australia or someplace else where they deal with fires, but we didn't have very much firsthand experience. So one of the big decisions that we all had to make was, do we pick or do we not pick? The smoke, grapes have a waxy skin, and the smoke adheres to the skin. And so the guaiacol and other compounds then get released into the wine. There's in both a free and a bound form. And that can give the wine not only aromatic and flavor smoke characteristics, but also kind of an ashy mouthfeel. And so a lot of, I won't say a lot, but some wineries decided not to pick. And that's having a big impact on growers. Because some wineries helped a little bit financially, some didn't. Some growers have crop insurance, most don't. But we're mostly now an estate winery, so we picked all of our fruit. We have contracts with 5 other growers, and we picked all of that fruit as well. And what we did was to kind of flex our business plan. So we're primarily known for making Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. We make a little bit of sparkling wine, a little bit of rosé, etc. But we just decided we're just going to flex our business plan to try to figure out how we take all this fruit in. And so we decided we're going to send a lot more fruit to press. And so we're going to get the juice away from the skins. So you're not getting that impact of the skins on the juice. But that means you don't have red wine anymore. So you have the opportunity for sparkling or rosé or white Pinot Noir, but not red wine. So we'll make sparkling brut rosé this year. We'll make probably a second rosé this year, but all of those will be in slightly larger quantities. And I'm even talking to a distillery in Salem, so that if we get to the end of the line and we've done everything we can, so carbon filtration or reverse osmosis or anything like that, and the wine still has too much smoke characteristic for us to want to put it in a bottle, then we'll distill it. We'll make gin or vodka or eau de vie or maybe all of the above. So, and we can do that because we're in the business of celebrating the vintage. So we can tell a unique vintage story for 2020.
Yeah.
I don't know I'd want to have to tell that story every year, but I can tell it this year. So,
Yeah.
so fingers crossed. I think it's all going to work out for the best.
Yeah.
Bill, can you talk about how picking crews went too? Because it was a pretty big concern at the time, and you're very conscientious about your crews. So
we had, as probably you all know, some of the most unhealthful air in the country for that 10 days. And Pinot Noir thrives on hillsides. And so the people who pick our fruit are running up and down hills constantly and taking big gulps of oxygen as they do that. So it was one of the big concerns that we had, and actually some of our clients had as well. We had one client in particular, Adelsheim, who they kept pushing their harvest date off. I sell them a little bit of fruit. They kept pushing their harvest date off. They finally ended up picking 8 days later than they had originally intended. And it was all about trying to keep the workers from having to work in those conditions. And so that was really the only option if you were going to try to manage the impact of the smoke on the health of your crews, is to delay the harvest for as long as you could. The risk in doing that is the grapes are in the smoke longer. They're actually getting more and more smoke characteristic. And we can see that, the difference between the fruit we picked early and the fruit we picked late, the difference in the amount of smoke, the amount of guaiacol that adhere to the skins is very different.
Well, Casey, your question about the worker health actually is leading me to want to put my next question to both of you. And it has to do with the COVID pandemic. And here you may want to speak not just in terms of your own personal experience, but your perspectives more broadly around the county and perhaps colleagues in other parts of Oregon in terms of the farm workers as a population at risk, and whether that has played out in some serious way for them. But then also beyond the farm workers, just if both of you could speak to how the pandemic has played out in your communities this past year. Maybe Casey, do you want to start then?
Sure. I mean, this year is the year of dealing with a pandemic for our county and for every other rural county as well as urban counties. So we, despite many people feeling like they are really different from each other, we've all been in this together. We all have struggled, especially public health officials. I'm the local public health authority. Struggle with communicating just the right amount of danger and insistence and concern to the public, right? Like we need to tell people the truth, and we also need to let them know that that we're taking care of them or that we're watching out for them, but that they have a responsibility to play. So I feel like that's really been the year from the governmental perspective, is how to talk to people about something that maybe they're not really used to talking about, which is that we actually have to take care of each other, that our actions are so impactful on our neighbors and on our friends and on our loved ones. I mean, that's, we could talk for hours about this one question. And I really don't want to take, I don't want to make it feel like it's a minor thing, because it is huge. It will forever change the landscape of our lives, I believe. Rural Oregon will be better and will be stronger because of, frankly, because of the responses of me, and because of the responses of Bill, and because of the responses of your legislators, and because of our governor. We will be better because of this. We just have to get through this, and we have to bring as many people safely through it as possible. And really, like, that's what I do every day. You know, I have notebooks filled with the people that we've lost, and the people who struggle in the hospitals right now, and our healthcare workers, and on and on. And we struggle every day to communicate the risks that people are taking with other people's lives.
What is the financial health of your hospitals and community health centers and so forth? I know that probably for certain kinds of tertiary care, you're more likely oriented to Portland, but there are a number of community institutions. And have they taken a financial hit as a result, and how are they doing?
They have taken a financial hit for sure. In our community, the Providence Health System is in Newburgh, and we have Willamette Valley Medical Center, which is one of the only for-profit hospitals in Oregon. And both of those have struggled, and both of those are taking the actions that they need to come through it, I would say. As hospitals were cleared out for COVID patients in the spring because we had no idea, all the elective, non-urgent procedures shut down. But as they came back on, a lot of people, we all still have needs, right? I had to go in and get a scan. I, got to do the thing and the tag. And so hospitals in our area definitely have struggled with the budgetary impacts of the shutdown, but they seem to be coming through it, in our communities at least.
Okay. Bill, your thoughts or experience?
Yeah, COVID has definitely had an impact on the rural communities. I want to give Casey kudos at this point. Casey has a Facebook page where he is very transparent about what's going on in the county and the work he's doing, along with his fellow commissioners and whatever. And there are times where he just gets eviscerated on that Facebook page, and he is always so calm and thoughtful and patient in explaining his point of view, to people, and I admire that a lot. And I will say it is the reason I am not ever going to be in politics, because I don't possess that same level of patience. I do think there are several challenges related to COVID. One is that politically, Yamhill County is probably much more divided than Multnomah County, and especially the city of Portland. And where in this last election, I think about 27,000 votes were cast for the president, and about 25,000 cast for President-elect Biden. And so there's a near even mix that way. I would wager, I haven't really looked deeply into the numbers, Casey will probably know these. I'm going to guess down ballot, that was a little bit different. There were probably more votes cast for Republicans and fewer votes cast for Democrats in the down ballot cases. And so I think, we certainly saw, we would go places and see people who were not wearing masks. We would see businesses that weren't really enforcing the wearing of masks. We would see people or hear from our friends who were being harassed in their cars because they were wearing a mask and not exercising their personal freedom, and things like that. And so I think that created a very different climate around how you handle COVID than I'm guessing you might have seen in many parts of Portland. And then I think it's also quite exacerbated by just the healthcare challenges of rural communities to begin with. And I think you've got a much more general topic about that, so I won't spend very much time on it there. But I think in a lot of cases, I mean, any problem you can think about in this country tends to be exacerbated in rural communities, which are not quite as resilient, I think, as urban communities. I will say for my own business, in addition to the health-related issues that were faced by our crews and the people working outside, we also essentially run a store, right? We have a tasting room, and on March 15th, that store was closed. And about 70% of our business is through our tasting room. And so, we were faced with an immediate prospect of having a big chunk of our business go away. And most of our wines that get sold through distributors are sold to restaurants, and restaurants nationally were closed. Right. And so that was a real challenge. I will say, so I'm primarily responsible for the vineyard management and winemaking and administration. My wife has a great team that does sales and marketing, and they did a brilliant job pivoting. We saw a hiccup for about 2 weeks in March, and then they actually got the train back on the tracks moving forward relatively quickly. For us, it became all about making sure that our staff that worked in our tasting room did not come back to work before they felt it was safe to come back to work. So we managed to put some technology in place where they could all work from home and we could still get phone calls to them. We managed to put together a schedule where if there were things they needed to do in the office, that they didn't have to be with a lot of other people, so that they could have the office to themselves or maybe with one other person. We put all the protocols in place for sanitizing and wearing of masks and all of that. And we actually, I think we could have opened in the middle of May, and we stayed closed until the middle of June, just to make sure that our staff felt like we were sufficiently prepared and that they felt safe coming back to work.
Yeah.
But that was a big part of how we had to face the pandemic.
Okay.
And obviously, David, there's so much more that we could talk about with it. Picking crews, for example, really struggle with their own their own ability to access healthcare, for example. Yes. When the $1,200 checks were sent out, there were a lot of people who didn't get any, including for their children who were born in the United States. So there's, some tremendous disparities that that COVID showed that maybe some people didn't notice before.
Yeah, I think that is turning out to be the case in a whole host of aspects of the pandemic, for sure, Casey. I appreciate your saying that. Well, apart from these two mega issues, the fires and the virus, what are some of the other things that are on the top of your neighbors' minds these days? And we might bracket the election or not, depending on how that might reverberate. But what do people talk about when they get together and reflect on their lives?
Does anyone talk about anything other than politics these days? Yeah, I think the politics has been a big thing, but I think the politics is symbolic for the different ways we imagine that problems will be addressed by whoever's in office. And so, if I can talk about healthcare a little bit more as an example, so we're fortunate, as Casey said, we have the Providence healthcare system 5 miles from my front door. We have other good hospitals. There are some good clinics. The Oregon wine industry, long before I arrived, figured out that a lot of the people that we depend on who work in our vineyards don't have health care. And so they started an organization called Salud, which is a partnership between the Oregon wine industry and the quality healthcare system, to provide healthcare to Oregon's vineyard workers and their families. And so through, mostly through an auction, but through a couple of other ways, they raise about $1 million a year. And thanks to the generosity of doctors and nurses and clinics in the area, they're able to multiply that to get about $4 million in healthcare services for people who work in the healthcare in the vineyards. So that is incredibly valuable. So I looked this up today just to make sure I had the numbers right. So you know, the healthcare that Winderlea provides to our staff who works for us, it's a gold plan. It has $2,500 deductible with a maximum $7,500 out of pocket, is $600, about $600 a month. For a family plan, it's almost $1,800 a month. And in that case, there's $7,500 deductible, a maximum of $15,000 out of pocket. So you just, you know, if you multiply, you know, $1,700 or $1,800 by 12 and add $15,000 to it, that's more than a lot of people who work in rural communities make, just for that one thing. And that doesn't include having an apartment or a house or groceries or getting clothes for your kids to go to school. So that is a massive, big ticket problem, I think, everywhere, but in rural communities, I think you especially see that causing issues. And
Yes, thank you.
Casey has a much broader view of it in his role.
You know, my notes for pretty much every question coming up relates to accessible healthcare or accessible internet. So really,
Fire away.
Yeah, no, I think it's really, healthcare is one of the many things that drags on people in rural communities, the cost of healthcare and the accessibility, but a lot of other things as well. You know, the cost of housing out here is so far surpasses the ability of people to afford it. So really the cost, I would say that when I get together with people, the way of life and the cost of that way of life are two of the major things that we talk about if we're not talking about politics. Because I don't know, I talk to a lot of people, or I should say I listen to a lot of people. I hear from a lot of people. And for every person who expresses this deep love for living in a wide open spaces, I hear from people who worry about how their wide open spaces or the way of living in that wide open space might change. And it's whether it's the cost of it or people like me who are wanting to put a footpath on an old railroad track that's somehow going to change their life for the worse. There's a lot of conversations about what people believe their way of life to be and how they fear it changing, but also how much they love the place that we live in. So, I mean, we talk a lot about how beautiful it is. Isn't that funny? I mean, Bill, right?
Love it here. Yeah. One of the things I definitely have been very grateful for and recognized right away, which was so different. I used to live in the city of Boston on the 8th floor of a condo building. And I immediately contrasted my life now, where I live on a 20-acre vineyard, and my life then, you know, in a 8th floor of a condo building and experiencing a pandemic. You know, I could walk out my door and see nature, and there was very little chance I was going to bump into some person I didn't know. Where you know, back in the day, I probably would have been a lot more fit, because I would have been walking up and down 8 flights of stairs constantly. But there was, you know, there are some really wonderful environmental benefits to living where we live, and that I think we all cherish. And I've been here 14 years now. I look out my window every day, and I'm in awe of the view I get to look at, and I'm very, happy that after 14 years, I haven't become so jaded about it that I stopped noticing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I should say that I grew up at the coast. I'm a surfer kid from Lincoln City, who happened to get a bunch of science degrees and then start a farm. But I have my parents and my friends and family from growing up. They all live. They choose to live in the place that they live, despite the challenges of chronic unemployment or underemployment and the challenges of poor quality housing stock. The Salmon River Highway, which so many homes were lost to fire recently. Friends and family and relatives who they choose to be in the place that they love so dearly, despite all the challenges of living there.
Well, what is the economic outlook for your communities going ahead? And I take Bill's point that the wine industry may make Yamhill County perhaps a little bit less representative of rural economics than many other parts of the state. But I suspect that you are familiar with many other parts as well. And before the pandemic, unemployment nationally, at least, was really approaching historic lows. Was that also the case during that pre-pandemic time in your areas? And what is the prospect right now?
Yeah, so you're exactly right. The wine industry does change the economic outlook of this region quite a bit. And so we are, oddly enough, an agricultural county that gets a lot of revenue from tourism. And you don't see that in a lot of farming communities. I will say one of the big challenges in being in rural communities. So, and let me back up half a step. For across the country, for family farms, so leave out the Cargills and the folks who are farming millions of acres, but for family farms, it is almost unheard of that at least one person doesn't have a full-time off-farm job, right? So it's very hard to make a living farming. So anywhere you are, that's a challenge. It's also hard to transition land from one generation to the next, especially since oftentimes, because there are so many idyllic things about living in an agricultural community, the highest and best use of a parcel of land is to develop it for something else. And so you can have 180 acres of land that is worth a couple of million dollars or more, that some 25-year-old couple who's trying to farm for a living is never going to be able to afford. So organizations, land trusts and conservation societies and the like, who exist to buy development rights from farmers are a great thing for rural communities. If there's $500,000 of development rights, the farmer who wants to retire can either sell those or donate those, get a tax write-off, and now the farm maybe is affordable for a younger couple who wants to get into farming. That's a very good thing. One of the biggest challenges, I think, in rural communities is that there are not a lot of employers. There are not a lot of robust employers. And so there are quite a few minimum wage jobs. And so you can be employed full-time in Yamhill County and still not be making anywhere near what it costs to live here. And so that is a very big challenge out here in Yamhill County. The wine industry, I think, has created some positive things in the community. One of those is not the cost of housing. The wine industry is one of the reasons the cost of housing is going up. And so that's making it less affordable for people who do other types of farming in the valley. I should probably stop there, and because Casey's much more knowledgeable about these things than I am.
Bill and I could talk about this forever. I mean, this, the interplay of ag and land and development, value-added farming. So I feel bad sometimes. I feel like I should put wine on more of a pedestal than I really do. I think of it as value-added, in many cases, direct market farming. And I feel like we need more of that in our communities. But Bill is also right that we have I think a fairly unique situation in Yamhill County, in that we are close to metro areas where there are lots of people. The wineries especially have created a human landscape that's beautiful in a natural landscape that's beautiful. And I say that because, you know, you look at trees along the creek down, we live on the Willamette River, and you look at those trees, that's a natural landscape that we could argue has been altered, but it's a beautiful place. And then Bill has these beautiful straight rows on these amazing hillsides, and people want to see it and they want to come here. But at the same time, it is challenging for starter farms, as it were. I would, as a person who did start his own farm with my wife, I actually think there's a lot more opportunity for that than I guess folks who might say differently to Bill. I do think that there's a lot of open niches and a lot of potential in our community. We are a community that has a higher per capita number of manufacturing jobs, but oddly enough, it's because winemaking is considered manufacturing by the state employment department. So we get to count Bill in those job making abilities.
He's an industrial tycoon.
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
as the bottles go by, but we do. Rural Oregon tends to ease into recessions more slowly than urban areas, and it tends to really, I guess the new phrase is, it has a long tail coming out of recessions. And so that's something that as a person who is kind of leading the charge to get out of the pandemic, I'll be doing the same thing with the economic recovery, is looking at where can we promote economic vitality in our community? Like, what are the open niches? What do people want really in their community? Okay, well,
we have just a few minutes before I'm going to invite our folks watching. I never thought I would say this, those watching at home, to participate with their comments and questions. But I did want to come back to something that you alluded to, Casey, earlier when you mentioned broadband. And the question for both of you is really, what policies or actions would, from any level of government or society, would have the greatest positive impact on the health and well-being of rural Oregonians, say over the next 10 years?
Why don't you start, Casey?
Oh my gosh, this is, if I ever, this is the question. I was really, really grateful, David, that you gave me this one in advance, because it's really, it gets to the heart of what do we want our community to look like. Really, because my vision of what elected officials do is promote the health, safety, and well-being and future of the people that I serve, right? They elect me, got to get the stuff off. They elect me, and then I'm charged with doing everything I can to make their lives as better as possible, as good as possible. And along those lines, there are so many things that we as policymakers and you all who are here can do. And I would say that I'd put at the top of the list, I do 3 things. Can I do that? Yeah, 3 things. So I'd say affordable and accessible internet. And that drives, especially right now, drives so much innovation in our communities. And it's not like, oh, let's code something and we'll make an app out of it. It's, I get emails all the time from people who are like, you know, I have a farm business and I can't keep up with my orders because my internet keeps dropping. I can't upload my new brochure for my grass seed product because my internet is too poor. So affordable and accessible internet across the community. And that's something we can totally do. The other one is a really big one, and I'm working on it at our local level, which is to have healthcare that's not connected to your employer. And that whether that be an expanded kind of public option, whether we join Medicaid, that if you want to, you can join Medicaid, Oregon Health Plan, or whether that's a universal health care. I don't really care about the details. I just know that Bill really hit on it when he noted that at least one person is employed off farm on almost every farm. And do you know why that is? It's because all other employers offer health insurance. And so one person is often out there teaching school or cleaning a kitchen or driving a bus so that they can have health insurance because it's so challenging for rural folks to have it on their own. Okay, so those are the first 2. And then believe it or not, I think that one of the best ways to promote the well-being of rural folks is to have comprehensive immigration reform. And I say that because in Yamhill County, 16% of our population has some connection, some nexus to immigration, either family members or they need immigration status improvement. But there are other counties in Oregon where it's 35, 40% of the population who doesn't trust, for good reasons, doesn't trust that a police officer or a teacher or the mail carrier might risk them having to leave the country. And so during the pandemic, we saw this really clearly, is that the public charge rule that the Trump administration has promoted says that you can't, if you access public services right now, it counts against your ability to get legal citizenship or legal immigration status. Okay, so those are the top 3, but I'm going to go through a couple others real quickly because I really feel like this is the issue: is how do you promote well-being in rural communities? And another one is raising the minimum wage in rural communities. And I say that because there are more people in rural communities who are challenged by the cost of living in rural communities than anywhere else. It's a huge thing. I just lost my light. Sorry about that.
No, you're there. You're still there.
That's good. All right. Another one in rural communities. So you probably, Bill knows about this, but well, need to keep my light here, is a lot of our tribal communities are essentially rural, even if there's the diaspora, the urban native people, right? And every time they come to the federal government and say, you're not following your treaty that you signed with us in 1847, is an opportunity for the federal government and the state government and locals to really look at where have we fallen short in our support of tribal communities. So I think that's a huge one. And then the last one I would say that is really important is that when communities do big projects, like there's some talk at some point of maybe having an infrastructure package. But at the same time, we're always building things, is if we have community benefits agreements in our communities, So a community benefits agreement is usually an agreement that's reached between a local government and people in the community who have an interest in it, either for a union, the amount of a project that goes to union contract, the environmental benefits of it, and the buying the local of equipment. Putting all that together in an agreement, whenever you're spending over a certain amount of money, goes a long ways, because like it or not, local, state, federal government money coming in is the lifeblood of rural communities, just like subsidies end up being kind of the lifeblood of a lot of farming communities. That's a lot of policy prescriptions.
Well, but I asked for it. So I want to ask you both one last question before we turn to our friends watching. I'm a resident of Portland. I've been an urban person pretty much my whole life, although I did live in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania for a number of years. But I'm an urbanite. What do you most want me to understand about your worlds?
Huh. Yeah, so I think that's a great question. I think there's a lot more interconnectedness between rural and urban communities than we imagine. And I think if you can strengthen some of those bonds, then you can strengthen the resiliency of both communities. So I would definitely, for those of you who hadn't read Nicholas Kristof's book, Tightrope. Mm-hmm. So Nicholas is a New York Times, he's a Pulitzer Prize winning writer. He's from Yamhill. And he and his wife have actually, I think, own a family farm out there. They're planting grapes, orchards, etc. But he does a great job describing what went wrong in Yamhill, like where that community went from a relatively strong, thriving community to a community now where half the kids that rode his bus to school every day are now dead. And a lot of that is the access to employment. And so the extent to which there's strong employment and strong connection between rural communities and more urban. So maybe it's not Portland specifically, but maybe it's bigger cities like McMinnville, mm-hmm. or, access to places like Beaverton. I think that makes a big difference in people's lives. I think we could definitely, the only thing I'll add to Casey's list from before, which I think was really comprehensive, is a good transportation infrastructure. Mm-hmm. I'm struck. I grew up in a working class city north of Boston. I took buses everywhere. If you think about, going grocery shopping and having to wait for a bus to get to the store and then do your shopping and then take a bus home, that probably adds an hour and a half to your trip, right? And so, having those kinds of infrastructure enhancements are critical.
Okay.
It's so great. I realized that I totally forgot that one, which is really the infrastructure of our daily lives we're so reliant upon. I have a bridge that I drive across when I leave the island to take produce into the city of McMinnville. We've only ever sold in McMinnville and Newburgh. And if that bridge went out because of a lack of investment in the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure of our lives, 100 farm families making their living off of hugely productive farmland would cease. We wouldn't have our livelihoods at all just because of that one bridge. Yeah. Okay. But the other thing that I feel like is a little bit harder to grasp, but it's something that we all need to figure out how to do, is that our schools, for one, have this very challenging thing, and that they're always connected to their tax base, their property tax base in their communities in Oregon, which are limited because of Measure 5. So we can't get more money to our rural schools because they always are going to be limited by the tax base. So a school in a more affluent area will always have more money per student than the school in a rural area. And so I think, and this is when I get a little bit nervous about it being recorded, is I think that we do need to figure out a way to disconnect the funding structures from students and school success. And so I think that I guess those are my like policy prescriptions, but I do want to remind people that folks in rural areas are just like people in urban areas. It's just that things are further apart here.
Yeah.
And so
All
that's
right.
a simplistic way of reminding people that while there might be political differences and there might be differences of philosophy and ways of seeing the world. I mean, Bill and I are more like urban people in some ways, but because we live in rural areas and we talk to lots of rural people, I think we both have that perspective. But we do all choose the places that we choose. And we all really do, like we all bleed. We are all the same kind of people, even if we live a little further apart.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. And now let me invite people to chime in. We have a few people, and you notice, again, I'll repeat this, that if you were to click on the participants icon at the bottom of your screen, you can call up the list of attendees and panelists, and then there's a raise hand function. And if you click on raise hand, we can bring you into the conversation.
And I should say that Bill and I both know how important it is to be price makers rather than price takers as farmers. So I think that's another thing to just keep in mind, is how to set it up so that you're making your price rather than taking your price, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, I am at the moment not seeing any hands, but that may be my problem rather than the hand raisers. Okay, I see Kay Abramowitz. So Shelley, if you could bring Kay onto the screen there, and there, okay? You're on, Kay. Unmute yourself, and here you go.
Okay, I've unmuted myself. Oh,
Yeah.
What's in my background? I have no idea. That's not
A
me.
garden.
Yeah, but somebody put me on the garden. Hello, Bill and Casey. So nice to meet you. This has been very, very enjoyable. Over in the last year and a half, Roy and I have had occasion to drive through some really, really rural parts of Oregon. Klamath Falls, Gold Beach, and they looked depressed. In Gold Beach, you see a great big hospital that must be serving a large community of people in the rural area, but I don't know anyone I saw who could afford it. And so I don't see any affluence in the areas that we drove through. And to the extent you could talk about those areas, what are we as Oregonians going to do to help those areas survive?
Yeah, so
That's my question.
that's a hard question. So I have my biases in all of these. I think Casey's comment about breaking the connection between educational opportunity and property tax is a really important one. My wife and I have a place in a rural community in Vermont, and 25 years ago, Vermont changed their funding for schools so that everybody pays the same property tax rate for education, and then that money gets distributed across the state. And people who are wealthy hate it. They refer to themselves as Gold Coast towns, but the studies that have been done on it have shown that not only have educational outcomes for people from lower income communities gone up, but educational outcomes for students in higher income communities have gone up. So I think that's one. I think the second thing is a living wage. If people can, if they have jobs, if those jobs pay a living wage, then they have enough money to do things that are going to help stimulate the economy. So my brother sold a business a couple of years ago. He jokingly says he's on a fixed income, but it's a really nice fixed income. And I always jokingly say that, if my brother gets another $1 million, he's not going to buy another bottle of wine from me. He's already buying all the wine he wants from me. But if 50 families got another $20,000, they might buy more wine from me. They certainly would go to the supermarket and they would buy some other things. They might buy some clothes, etc. Right? But that money goes immediately into the economy. And then I think thirdly is solving the healthcare problems. Like, so many families are one medical emergency away from bankruptcy. And so I think if you can do those three things, increase educational opportunity, give people a living wage, and reduce the likelihood that people will be bankrupted by a health crisis, I think you make a lot of progress.
Oh my gosh, it's like we planned this back and forth. If I, as a farmer, first generation full-time farmer up until being commissioner, if I told you my own story about the costs of healthcare and health insurance, we would all be crying, and so I'm going to skip it. But I'll tell you, lived experience, our family, we have benefited from the generosity of things like the Oregon Health Plan and OHSU's foundation. So if any of you are on the OHSU Foundation, thank you so much. But it's really, Kay, your question is really I think the reason why we're here, which is how can all of us together figure out a way to help our neighbors in a way that benefits everybody. And I agree entirely with what Bill has to say, but then I also think about it in terms of what role communities want to play, because we can help provide things, but if a community doesn't have maybe the particular mindset, they may not ever want to, they may not feel like they ever can or want to choose a different way of living in the world. I've kind of thought about it, well, I've thought about this a lot, is kind of what role a county is playing in the greater world. And unfortunately, a number of counties across the United States are what I would probably call, for lack of a better word, is colonial capitalism, where there's a large, either a large employer or a fertilizer company or a seed company or a timber company. And I just, stepped onto the third rail of Oregon politics by using that word, that sees the people in the community as their way of obtaining wealth and producing a product that gets shipped somewhere else. So that's like a colony, right? It's always just shipping product out to the detriment of the community itself. And then in our case, in Yamhill County, we also have a visitor economy kind of on top of that. So we have a beautiful place that's producing things that get shipped out, and then people want to come and visit it. But then I feel like in the future, we can have counties and communities that are rural, that are actually interdependent with urban counties, where people and ideas are flowing back and forth. And some of the ideas and the ways of life of rural folks actually influence how urban folks live, and vice versa. I can say that I think that Yamhill County is better off because Bill Sweat's here. And Bill Sweat was living an urban life and has come to this community and is as much a part of the community as anybody else. But we are more rich in ideas and in vitality because of Bill's presence. So that's kind of how I've seen things at a bigger scale.
Kay, did you want
Thank
to
you,
add
Casey.
something? I see your hand up again. Or are you just, yeah, go ahead.
This is Kay's Lesahap Roy.
Oh, yes, Roy.
Neither one of you have talked at all about cooperation or lack thereof between the between county and state representatives and state government. What kind of cooperation is there? What do you expect from them?
Yeah, I think Casey's probably better suited to answer that one.
Bill knows everybody at the state, so I thought he was going to jump in first. You know, what was your name?
Roy.
Roy. Okay. Roy, it's a great question. Until the pandemic, I actually had never really talked to anybody in our legislative delegation or at the state level. And so it takes a crisis sometimes to really get people cooperating, especially when, you know, my state legislators are all Republicans, except for the one who was trying to call me during this meeting, oddly enough. And I'm like I think they call me the liberal nut job. So it took a crisis to get us talking to figure out how to help the person or the 10,000 people in our community who are unemployed. So the crisis ends up building the relationships between local and state level officials where other things might not. On the like the executive level, I've never talked to the governor so much as since the wildfires. You know, we've communicated with her staff, or I communicate with her staff a lot around COVID, but really until the wildfires, it wasn't a weekly conversation. And actually, Bill had a lot more experience until the wildfires talking with our governor, oddly enough. But I really do think that I suppose what we should be doing is thinking about our unemployment, our chronic unemployment, and our chronic undereducation, and our chronic high cost of housing as being crises that require state, federal, and local officials to just work together. I must say, though, I really want to give a shout out to Congresswoman Bonamici. She calls me on my birthday and wishes me a happy birthday. She calls me to try to find out what's really happening in the communities that she represents, even when she's on the floor of the House. So kudos to her.
Indeed.
Thank you.
You know, I think this is a really interesting challenge, Roy, because we live in counties, and I think this is true for a lot of rural counties, where government oftentimes is not seen as a force for good. And so there can be resistance. And I don't know why I hadn't really thought about it in this way until I was listening to Casey. So I'm a progressive, and I have lots of wonderful ideas about how we can make this a better world. And I'm perfectly happy to advocate for government intervention for those things to happen. But somebody else may not agree with my view of the world, and they may not want the government to intervene in that way. And I think maybe the thing we don't do as well as we could, and I will exempt Casey from this because he does this really well, is to really, really go out into the community and say, what is it you need, right? Like, there are things we can do. We can put something under you that will help, or we can change the way something is done in a way that will help. I don't know that we always do as good a job asking people what it is they want, and then show them that we can help them get that in a way which reinforces their belief that maybe there are times when having a strong government can be helpful for you. In the absence of that, I think there's a lot of resistance to the government getting involved.
Other hands up before we adjourn? Okay, seeing none, I want to thank Casey and Bill very, very sincerely for this. This has certainly fulfilled my hopes for listening to a lot of important things. We hope to see you both in person at the University Club one of these coming months and toast you in person. And
I'd love that.
but before we go, I do see either Kay or Roy with some additional comment. Yes?
And David, for your facilitating of this conversation. It was absolutely fascinating.
Well,
And I hope to see you. There we go. You're going to see me here pretty soon.
yes.
Here's to you guys. And
Oh, very
Cheers.
we're going to drink at the club one day. We will. I hope to see you both there. And I will host you both there. Hold me to it.
Okay, we shall, Kay.
All right.
Thank you all very much. And thank you again, Shelley, for helping us with this evening. And we look forward to another opportunity to be together either virtually or in person. So thanks very
thank
much. Everyone have a
Thank
good
you,
night.
David and Shelley.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Shelley. Thanks, Bill.
Yeah.